Clerical sexual abuse, the paper trail 1,000 years from now, students of jurisprudence will look back at the laws passed at the beginning of the 1st century of the 3rd millennium and find laws dealing with gun control, abortion, capital punishment, and prisoner abuse. They will rightly conclude that these issues must have been of great concern to us. Why would we have bothered to legislate for such issues if we were not having serious problems with them? Then they will read official documents, newspaper accounts, and trial records and find that we held great debates about life issues. They will discover that guns were a plague in our society, that abortion and the death penalty split the nation, and that we were sending prisoners to faraway places to be tortured. And then they will say, see, even way back then, laws were not passed in a vacuum. Laws are never passed in a vacuum. Legislators have enough to do dealing with real-life threats to society without wasting time on imaginary issues. Lawmakers who return to the same issue over and over again do it because the laws already on the books are not having their desired effect. Even the rare law that forestalls some hypothetical problem is passed because it anticipates a situation that poses a real threat in the present. There is always some reason for passing a law. The same is true of Catholic Church laws. They too are not passed in a vacuum. Laws are passed, instructions are given, and decrees made in response to a perceived threat to the well-being of the faithful. The Church as a body or society at large. For instance, when Rome said birth control was immoral, it was not because of some hypothetical situation dreamed up in a moral theology textbook. High sex was because many Catholics believed birth control was morally acceptable and were already practicing it. And the more often Rome reinforces its stance on an issue, the more obvious it becomes that it is being disobeyed, just like any other legislator. If Rome were to stop talking about an issue altogether, it would be either because it had given up on it or because it had gone away. A review of the history of the Church's legal system and case law demonstrates that there are some issues that never go away, no matter how hard Rome tries to legislate them out of existence. One of these topics is the consistent failure of clerics to observe their vows of chastity. From the early 4th to the early 21st century, we find a constant flow of monastic rules and canons promulgated by individual bishops, gatherings of local bishops, councils of all the bishops, and papal decrees attempting to regulate the sex lives of the clergy. From the earliest days, when priests were allowed to marry, we find laws telling them to avoid sex, and when celibacy became mandatory for the clergy, we find laws against concubinage. We also find condemnations of homosexuality in the ranks of the clergy, the sexual abuse of minors by members of the clergy, and the solicitation of sex by priests in the confessional after embracing Christianity. Augustine also embraced the Church Fathers' skeptical view of human sexuality, but with some mitigation. Sex in marriage was permissible, even though he agreed with Jerome and Ambrose that chastity was preferable. The sexual organs and urges needed to be controlled, and men needed to avoid sexual desire that was excited by women. This pessimistic and sometimes volatile attitude had to come from somewhere. But that somewhere, according to many Christian scholars, was not the Gospels of Jesus Christ, the ultimate source of Catholic teaching. The Gospels make few references to sex and show none of the morbid fascination with sexuality that is found in the Christian literature the first 4 centuries or the canonical formulations of the medieval period. 6. The answer to the question of the source of traditional Catholic sexual teaching is complex. One of its roots can be traced back to the prevalence of Greek Stoic dualism, which regarded the flesh as evil and the spirit as good, and its influence on pre-Christian thought. Its leading spokesman was Seneca, a contemporary of Jesus and St. Paul. Under the influence of the Stoic tradition, Seneca held that the wise should avoid the corruption of bodily comforts and pleasures, especially those derived from sex. Some early Christian writers, Augustine championed them, subscribed to Stoicism, and even went beyond it in their vilification of sex. By the end of the patristic age, 800 CE, 2 opposing views of human sexuality had emerged. Jerome, and those who followed him, stressed the dichotomy between body and soul and spirit and matter, and believed that sex was the primary expression of fleshly evil, whereas Augustine had tempered the earlier attitudes and held that sex was basically a useful and good force in human life, but debased by and passion. Next episode coming soon. Thanks for waging hearts.